With the over-the-shoulder path for our breastplate created and in place, we may be wondering how we're going to turn this into an actual polygon surface. Well, there are a number of approaches that we could take in 3ds Max. For example, we could use either the loft or sweep tools in order to create the exact shape that we want here. We could also create a few more splines and then use the cross-section and surface modifiers in order to interpolate between the splines and so create a surface from them. However, because I know that we are going to be using presets along with an open subdiv modifier so as to get the exact kind of smoothing and edge creasing that we want, I'm just going to take the simplest approach here and use the available options for the spline object that we have already created. First of all then, let's click to select our spline and then come over to the modifier stack in the command panel. Now at this moment in time, because we are using an edit spline modifier to create the shape that we want, we don't actually have access to any kind of render controls. Of course, we could come down to the circle level of the stack and access the render options from there, but because I am perfectly happy with the spline shape that we already have, I'm simply going to right click and convert this to an editable spline, which means that we now have access to a rendering rollout. Let's open that up, put a check in the Enable in Viewport control, and then rather than using the radial option, switch instead to rectangle, which as you can see gives us control over both the length and width of the rectangular shape that we are now generating. Looking at our reference, we can see very obviously that the width of this border shape is greater than its length. And so, back in 3ds Max, let's set the width value of our spline to around about 3 centimeters and the length to something like 2 centimeters, both of which we can adjust later on should we want to. Now with the base shape in place, let's press the M key to open up the material editor, where we already have our modeling material set up, meaning we can simply left click and drag on the output of the material in order to apply it to our spline shape. If we now use the greater and less than symbols on our keyboard, we can step through the keyframes that, as we have already noted, add a little bit of transparency to the material. And so, if we were using a reference card behind our model, for instance, or if we needed to see portions of the model that currently sit behind one another, well, now we can do so. What we have now, though, is, as you can see, a perfectly usable polygonal outline for this over-the-shoulder portion of our breastplate. Now, we still have a little bit of adjusting to do here, as well, of course, as needing to create the inner section of the breastplate geometry. And so, let's move quickly on to our next exercise in order to get that work underway.